Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are just at the noon hour right now, and we have a full 90 minutes of information to share with people. So I know we still have participants coming in, but we're going to go ahead and get started. So my name is Connie Silva, and I am the director of the State Performance Plan Technical Assistance Center. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar, Ensuring Equitable Special Education Referrals for Multilingual Learners, Key Considerations for Student Support Team. And this is a reminder that this is provided to you through funding from the California Department of Education, who funds our SPP-TAP project. So just a couple things. We have two expert presenters today that I will introduce you to in just a minute. Just going to give you some things to consider as we get started. We are using chat during the session, so I'm going to remind folks to change your little setting at the bottom to from all panelists and attendees to everyone. And then that way, when you put in a question or a comment, everyone can view that as well. And also we will have polls during this session. So when those pop up, please just go ahead and put in your response, and then we'll share out what the sort of aggregate information is. And as a reminder, all of our webinars are recorded. So this is currently being recorded. And we do that so that we can make sure to archive the information. You'll be able to look at it later. You'll also be able to share it with your colleagues that are not able to attend today. I can see from our numbers now, we're still under 100 and we have over 300 people registered. So sometimes that happens that people registered so they can watch it later. So that's why we make sure to have the recording. So just know that that will be available to you. And as typical, if you'd like to go ahead and say hello in chat, you're welcome to do that as we get started. So we have our regulars who often come in and let us know that they're here and which district they're with. And so we like to see that. And we do keep tabs on who joins us. So as we get started, what first thing I'm going to do is introduce, as I said, our two expert presenters today. We are very, very excited to have both Lupita Olguin-Rubio and Vanessa Lopez, who are both currently coordinators of inclusionary practice at the Imperial County SELPA. And they're members of the SELPA content lead team on improving outcomes for English learners with disabilities. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit about each of them briefly, but you're going to learn a lot more as they share their expertise today. So first, Lupita Olguin-Rubio has over 20 years of experience as a curriculum coordinator, providing professional development on topics related to English learners' literacy and language development, as I said, at the Imperial County Office of Education. And Ms. Olguin-Rubio believes that multilingualism is an asset and that every student is entitled to have his or her voice valued and heard. And she operates with a systems lens and recognizes that as educators, we are all change agents and have the capacity and ability to contribute to the transformation of our school systems and to improve outcomes for all learners. And then we also have Vanessa Lopez, and she has over 20 years of experience educating English learners with disabilities in resource and self-contained classroom settings. And Ms. Lopez enjoys working towards shining a light on the myriad assets that English learners, students with disabilities, and those duly identified contribute to our education system and community. She believes in being a change agent and an advocate for all students and in the commitment and zeal that educators in the field bring to their classroom setting on a daily basis. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Lupita and Vanessa. Again, thank you so much for being here.
Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us on this beautiful afternoon. It's Thursday after all, getting close to that weekend, just so it can't be all that bad. Again, welcome. So it's important for us to start this conversation by framing it with its appropriate context. So you heard Connie talk about Lupita's background and my background. And before we actually start getting into some numbers and percentages, we want you to know that this partnership is very much planned out to be one that builds our collective understanding, our collective expertise. Being that Lupita comes from English learner, a large English learner, years of experience, general education, and mine being more along the lines of special education over the past 18 years at our local district, and then these last 5 years here at the SELPA. So we bring that together as we engage in this conversation related to dually identified learners. You'll hear us say dually identified learners, and I want to be clear that we're talking about students who are English learners and students who have met eligibility criteria in one of the 13 distinct disability categories. So let's take a look at this table. So this table is going to share some information with us related to students who are English learners. So that's who we're starting with, our English learners, and the percentage of students that are English learners within the top 3 disability categories. Those top 3 are specific learning disability, SLD, speech or language impairment, SLI, and autism. Surface level, look at those numbers and think about the chat question. What about these statistics gives you pause? I'll give you a minute to think about that and utilize the chat feature to answer that question, which will be followed up by a poll. So I'll give you a minute. Thank you, Heather. Too many students over-identified as being SLD. Possible over-identification of multilingual students that are still acquiring the knowledge. Lack of proficiency with English and limited exposure can lower performance on these English-based tests. Are language and disability features separated and accounted for? Assessing in English, when should be assessing a native language? I feel that the graph is pretty much spot on with what I see at my school. There are times that my team is pressured to assess English learners. How does this compare to EO rates? Examining LPAC scores closely. Potential lack of ELD services interventions. What is the pathway leading to the assessment for special education? Thank you so much for sharing your reflections. And while you're still populating the chat, I want us to launch the poll, Lupita or Jen, if you can help me with that. Do these percentages reflect the students with disabilities who are also English learners in your school? Give it a couple more seconds for people to enter their response into the poll.
We have about half of the responses so far. Can give it a few more seconds. Okay, it looks like it's slowing down, so I'll go ahead and show the results.
So survey says, yes, 79% of you indicate that these percentages do in fact reflect what you see in your schools. And just those of us that are involved in special education, we've known that this has been the trend for the past couple of years. So one of the things that we want you to consider Also, when we're looking at these top 3 most frequently occurring disability categories for students who are English learners, is that these 3 categories share something in common. And that something in common is that there is some level of impact to language in relation to the disability category and how it manifests. So a lot of relevant questions, important questions to reflect upon were asked in the chat. And our hope is that through our time together today and through our learning today, we're going to be able to address some of those questions, some of those reflections that you've shared with us in the chat. So a lot of you alluded to the fact that we have English learners who are newcomers. We have perhaps English learners where we haven't necessarily teased out if we're looking at an academic difference, language difference, potential disability. But the starting point of our conversation is that English learners are not monolithic. They are a diverse group. We have those that are newly arrived with adequate schooling, newly arrived with limited formal schooling, those who are developing normally, are long-term English learners, and those at risk of becoming long-term English learners. Again, not something new, something we know and understand about our system. The bulk of the resources that we're going to be sharing with you are pulled from the California Practitioner's Guide for Educating English Learners with Disabilities. And this is a compendium of all sorts of information from both sides of the house: multilingual needs, English learner needs, and special education needs. So through this guide, we are able to share out resources that, though not binding on local educational agencies or entities, are best practices, except of course for those statutes, regulations, and court decisions that are referenced. But all in all, a series of resources that are going to support our discussion in meeting the needs of dually identified students. The document itself is a hefty document, a lot of resources. If you haven't had a chance to peruse through it, please do so after our session, so you can learn about all things related to students who are dually identified, from the identification of English learners to the MTSS framework, pre-referral interventions, the development of the IEP, proposing exit from SPED services, and reclassification from English learner status. The structure of the document itself is very much consistent throughout and provides you with multiple entry points in relation to what topics you are interested in. Today, we're focusing in on section 2, all things pre-referral and referral, assessment, and the IEP process. Chapter 3 focuses in on all things the referral process for English learners, and Chapter 4 on the assessment of English learners for identifications as students with disabilities. Going back to your responses in the chat that we highly appreciate, because we learn so much from you every single time we get to interact with practitioners, is that a lot of you are already touching upon topics that are covered in chapters 3 and 4. So today we're going to be digging a little bit deeper so that we can take a look at what is in the California Practitioner's Guide as far as pre-referral and referral assessment and IEP process practices, and those that you are experiencing at your school sites. So because, as we shared, the document is very robust, we know that we need a sort of structure to help us navigate all topics covered within, because it can become a bit overwhelming. So every chapter is kicked off by a series of questions. So we've pulled those questions that are specific for administrators. I want to give you a second to take a look at these 2 questions presented here, and take a minute to utilize the chat feature to drop in what it is that you believe is in place at your school site that might lead to over or under identification. Let me rephrase that. Based on what we've shared, the propensity of students qualifying for services under SLD, SLI, or autism, considering over and under identification, what practices that you have been privy to, that you are aware of, may be contributing to over or under identification. I'll give you a minute to process that and utilize the chat feature. Initial and follow-up SSTs, RTI, pressure from teachers or parents, lack of robust ELD services, misusing or misunderstanding the SST process, lack of RTI, little to no monitoring, language difference versus disability, fidelity of implementation, culturally responsive practices, RTI. And really, every single one of these practices that are linked to over or under identification, you all touched upon in those initial questions that we asked early on when we asked you to reflect on the percentage for SLD, SLI, and autism. And chapter 3 is going to be focusing in on identifying factors in the instructional environment, English language proficiency, progress, and its effect on academic progress. And then again, how this is linked into the review of pertinent school intervention, behavioral, and health data, as well as ruling out extrinsic factors to make an appropriate referral to special education. Again, all of these things that you've touched on already in the chat discussion. So the focus now is going to be on how it is that we might come to this issue of over-identification, under-identification, and why English learners may be referred to special education too soon. We're going to listen to Dr. Alba Ortiz talk about over and under-identification. And while she's talking, consider the following questions. What do you want to explore further regarding to your SPED referral process and how it's done in your schools? So as you're watching and listening with a purpose, feel free to start entering into the chat as she's speaking, and then we will review some of your responses so that we can engage in a deeper conversation.
When you look at over-identification, you get kind of the opposite face of the problem. In this case, people think that the problem is a disability and they don't consider linguistic or cultural differences or educational opportunity as contributors to the problem. And so they make a referral too quickly. And then you get into some really difficult issues. We don't have the assessment instruments that we need to make an accurate identification of disabilities among students who speak different languages. Even when you have assessment instruments available in Spanish, they may also be culturally and linguistically irrelevant for the student that you're concerned about. So the assessment instruments, you can take almost any student and assess them with the available tools, and they'll qualify because the instruments are inappropriate. Sometimes we make the decision that general education can't serve the needs of the student, particularly because we have populations of students that really have significant learning difficulties. If you look at students with interrupted formal schooling, for example, who come here as adolescents, haven't been in school or have had inconsistent schooling, the gap is so wide that the sentiment is that if you make a special education referral, the student will be with a teacher who has specialized skills, smaller classes, materials designed to close those significant gaps. And so special education can actually become a dumping ground for students who have significant difficulties for reasons other than the presence of a disability. So overrepresentation becomes a huge issue because we haven't been able to overcome what is oftentimes negative expectations associated with the disability. So the student over time does worse because they're not getting the appropriate instruction, because we may not have special education teachers who understand how to support the language and cultural needs of the student. So even though they're in this smaller class, the gap can widen because the instruction is inappropriate. So there are a lot of factors that contribute to overrepresentation. And I think one of the big issues for students is that once we put them in, we seldom let them out. And so we identify students as having disabilities very early, and then they can spend the rest of their school career in a special education program or receiving special education services, even though they don't have a disability.
We have a all caps amen. It all leads to significantly disproportionate student groups and CSAs. I don't think we give students the vision of leaving SPED. And really what Dr. Alba Ortiz touched upon, and I know that for some of us that worked in an elementary school setting, when we start seeing that influx of referrals come 4th through 5th grade, and when it's an English learner, and having these questions related to, well, what did comprehensive ELD look like for this particular student? Have we really taken a look at how it is that the student is accessing content? And all those additional questions that come up in relation to what in fact makes an appropriate referral for special education. And also that oftentimes, you know what they say about good intentions, right? Sometimes just the thought of, well, let's get them somewhere where they can be served, where they can be supported. However, we know that comprehensive ELD is part of all English learners' core instruction, including those where we suspect that a disability might occur. Because then, to quote another Dr. Ortiz, Dr. Samuel Ortiz, we end up having this high percentage of students who are English learners, multilingual learners, who qualify for services under SLD, but not specific learning disability. It becomes a sympathetic learning disability. So I always appreciate Dr. Alba Ortiz's take on issues related to over-identification and why English learners, multilingual learners may be referred to special education too soon. And Helene, yes, we believe that we need ongoing systemic PD on all of these issues. And then Valerie shares that teachers have a lot on their plates and want help for the kids. And we are the only supports available, except we know, right, Valerie, that the responsibility is to provide comprehensive ELD as core instruction for our students who are English learners. So it's in another video that perhaps we can link in the future, where 2 of the speakers say that, you know, if our students are already at our school sites and we have the capacity to provide them the comprehensive ELD support that they are entitled to by law, then that should be the first starting point. However, absolutely related to having that need of ongoing PD for all practitioners. So earlier in the chat and in some of the discussions that were shared out in the chat as well, we talked about perhaps the SST process being faulty or not being complete or as robust as it could be. So right now I want to call your attention to this wheel of referrals. I want to make clear that this is not a how-to. or a checkpoint of checkboxes, do this, do that to get to SPED, but rather to look at this as an iterative process between sections 1, 2, and 3 that have been enlarged and are presented to you here on my right side of the screen, where the first step is that referral made by staff, parent, guardian, counselor, etc. Some of you mentioned that sometimes you get a parent request, and then that sort of ties us into that timeline, especially if the procedures that we have in place once we receive that referral aren't clear, whether in practice or documented. The second step is the identification of students' targeted needs via team process. And then that third step in this iterative process here in the beginning, as we're considering a potential referral, number 3 is those pre-referral activities and interventions that are going to be in place. So earlier, somebody mentioned tiered supports, tiered interventions. This is definitely the place for that. So as we're looking at these first 3 steps, I want you to use a minute of our time to think about what procedures are in place once you receive a referral, how it is that your teams identify the targeted areas, and what those pre-referral activities and interventions look like. Not necessarily all 3, choose one and reflect upon utilizing the chat what these look like at your site. Or you might have a question. Feel free to use the chat for your question as well. Thank you for sharing out. Yes, definitely. Sometimes we get those letters that are suspiciously similar. Great, thank you for sharing what that MTSS process looks like. Preschool intake meetings, absolutely, absolutely. That is fantastic. It's great to see how some districts are coming together to make their MTSS process a clear system. Universal supports, first best instruction. Appropriate tools to objectively assess. The team process. Right. Great point. The cost process can be quite variable across a district, and the system may be inequitable if implemented variably. Absolutely true. Absolutely true. So again, some things that are within our sphere of influence and some things that are not. Today, we want to give you tools to work within your sphere of influence in this process, because we know that changes cannot happen overnight. And part of the process is having these reflective conversations. And I want to offer you the following, and the following is a brave space for us to share and collaborate. And I appreciate you already going there and being so candid and clear with your thoughts and reflections in our chat, because that is how we start the growth process as we address all things referral to equitable pre-referral processes. So to visualize it and have it be a little bit more clear as far as the structure that we're going to be taking together today is the pre-referral process, as we're going to be covering it today, is going to be broken down into 3 sections: the CUME file check and tools to do that, extrinsic factors, and intervention summary. So when we go through each of these sections, we're going to be giving you some resources, and we're going to give you a minute, which is limited time, but I want to set that up so that you know what to expect when we move forward, to look at a resource, and the lens will always be reflection, current practice, and the resource, and making that connection. How might this resource be useful in your current process, whether it be to initiate a process that doesn't exist just yet, to refine an existing process, or as a reinforcer of, yes, good job, or doing exactly this already. So let's move on into our deep dive into our components of the pre-referral process. So when I say multidisciplinary team approach, I want you to use the chat to tell me who is in your MDT, your multidisciplinary team, for your SST or for your MTSS team. Drop it in the chat. Who are the core components, participants in your MDT? Emphasis on the MD, multidisciplinary. Now, if we have a student who is an English learner, who might be a good addition to the MDT? And that's more of a rhetorical question, right? Because what we want you to think about is that, as somebody pointed out in the chat, you know, some of our teachers are so overwhelmed, and although teachers are, especially those elementary school teachers, right, we teach multiple disciplines throughout the day. However, we recognize that there are gaps in practice and gaps in expertise. Earlier, we talked about the makeup of our team and how it's very much intentional and bringing together our collective expertise. Well, Lupita really helps fill up those blind spots or those lack of understanding of some items related to English learners. And I do the same for her in whatever questions might arise or blind spots might exist in relation to special education. So when you're considering the makeup of your multidisciplinary team approach, especially focused in on the topic we're covering today, which is equitable pre-referral processes for multilingual learners, is that you would definitely want to have an ELD TOSA, an ELD teacher, a specialist, somebody who has deep and clear understanding of what an English TOSA is, a teacher on special assignment. So it could be a coach, it could be a resource teacher. You know, me in SPED world and education world, like I just throw out acronyms. So please definitely ask your questions if I throw out an acronym you're not familiar with. So you would really want to make sure that you have somebody with deep understanding and knowledge, because if your MDT, your multidisciplinary team, is just your site principal, your gen ed teacher, and perhaps a school counselor, there might, but there might not be enough understanding of what an English learner is experiencing as they're progressing through the stages of acquiring English as their second language. So again, very important for us to consider who is in this team. And if the makeup of your team has not included an ELD teacher, that's okay. We now know that it would be ideal to have them there to provide ideas, suggestions that perhaps might not require us to go the route of a special education assessment referral for potential eligibility. Again, those universal tools, those tiered supports, all take place prior to making that referral. So as we move forward with that, you might have your team, but now utilizing this multidisciplinary team approach, how is it that we are going to go through that CUME file? The CUME file has all sorts of information in there. It's a treasure trove of information that can be a very helpful tool in building a robust student profile. However, we don't know what we don't know. What do we collect? What is relevant information? What is irrelevant information? So Appendix 3.2 gives you a structured resource that helps you pull information so that your multidisciplinary team has access to a robust student profile and can start making recommendations that are based on current data. And your CUME file should have the most recent appropriate information that you need in relation to making these pre-referral activities equitable for students who are multilingual language learners. So to do that, the link has been dropped into the chat, but I'm going to pop it open so I can walk you through the resource and we can reflect on this resource for a bit. So this CUME file check is meant to be a supportive tool for the pre-referral process in regards to the role of the multidisciplinary team. So this could be done in a variety of ways. You can either have this pre-filled out by your SST chair or your MTSS chair, or it could be a group build where we all have the file check or it's projected and we're digging through the CUME file and we are pulling relevant information. Because it starts with very basic demographic data that we might have from our, Synergy, EduPoint, whatever it is that your LEA utilizes. But then we start going a little bit deeper with information that might be a little bit more nuanced or that might kick off follow-up or additional digging, so to speak. So when we start looking at the LPAC scores, that's going to be important. And I would say that in this section, I would want to keep not just the most current one, but also some level of historical performance on the LPAC or the alt LPAC, now that it's fully operational. So you would want to take a look at that information to see where it is that the student is in their journey. Additionally, this form is, as you can tell, it's a PDF form that can be printed out. It could be saved locally on your device and it can be filled out electronically as well. So you are completing all of these sections and these might in fact kick off additional steps. For example, you might come to the hearing, vision, health concerns, and it could be that they haven't passed their vision assessment. It might be that there are some attendance concerns. It might be that there has not been any ELD instruction for this student. There might be behavioral concerns. Now, these are starting points to a discussion. What I mean by that is the following. Attendance. I said it might be an issue. Why would that be an issue? Follow up with the parent. you know what, turns out that he's been having a lot of headaches and I've been taking him to a specialist and now they're concerned that those headaches are related to a tumor. Oh, wow, that's important to know. It could be that behavior concerns, consistent, and then we find out that this student has recently been living with other relatives and not the parents. So again, important for us to have a way of structuring and coordinating information to support our teams. So I said I would give you a minute to look through it, and I do want to do that. But I also want you to tell me if this is a resource that might be useful for your teams, or if you have something in place already to support your pre-referral process. And remember that because this is a PDF file as well, you can open up with Acrobat DC and add additional fields to make it useful to your forms. Absolutely. The CUME file has all sorts of good information, but it's very easy to get overwhelmed by what's in there, which is why we appreciate this very clear and comprehensive tool to inform our process. Now, again, via this mechanism of the multidisciplinary team approach, now we want to focus in on those extrinsic factors. So you'll notice that we started with the CUME file, and I said that some of those questions would prompt additional digging, investigation, etc. Largely, these will be our extrinsic factors. And Appendix 3.3 is another supportive tool for the multidisciplinary team to engage in equitable pre-referral processes. How can we say that they're equitable? Because these are focused in on specifics related to English learners. So this resource, I really appreciate, because if you are not a person that is too deeply familiar or comfortable with what it is that we're looking for in relation to extrinsic factors for English learners, this is a fantastic resource. So as I'm walking you through it, I want you to think of the following and utilize the chat feature. What extrinsic factors may impact academic progress and engagement? Let's pop open the form and let's explore it so that we can see what it's offering for us in relation to the multidisciplinary team approach. So this form, again, basic demographic data, downloadable, fillable, printable, savable into your device. And it starts asking a series of questions. So that CUME file might have generated some answers that make you wonder and want to learn more. So it's divided into sections. This document, the extrinsic factor for English learners, is divided into sections, and it provides you some questions that you would want to consider. Whether responding yes, no, or investigating is going to give you a clear visual of areas that we as a team are looking at. We are looking at psychological factors, physical factors, areas identified for intervention within each section. Then we're looking at personal and cultural factors that may be impacting learning. And a lot of these questions, quite frankly, when I first came across this resource, were questions that, yes, I had considered, but some I had not. So it's a great tool to keep us focused in on those specifics to extrinsic factors for students who are English learners. Language development factors that may impact learning, and those interventions that might be identified, as well as previous and current learning environment factors that may impact learning. And it gives you a list of some of the supports that have been tried, instructional techniques that have been tried to support the student. And again, this 6-page document can be edited to meet your needs, but if you don't have a tool just yet, this is a great starting point to start collecting information, making notes that goes above and beyond what you might find in your SST program or in your documentation process for ensuring an equitable referral for special education. So I'm being mindful of our time, and I know that Lupita has a lot of resources that we still want to get to, more than that organization of the resources that have been shared. But this is one that I think is critical. So all of them are great tools, but this intervention summary gives you a place, a one-stop shop for you to document those pre-referral activities and interventions, from progress monitoring and data collection to what integrated and designated ELD look like for the student. And the question of, are the students' needs related to a language difference or a disability? And please do not fret, Lupita has a great resource to help us engage in those conversations, because those should be taking place in our pre-referral activities before we're actually filling out those referrals for assessment for potential eligibility of special education services. So this intervention summary, just like all of our other appendices, are downloadable, fillable, printable, and editable. And what this does great is that it allows you to document in one place the interventions and the outcomes and dates for the student, while starting with those student strengths. So again, this resource available for you here, you can add additional windows if you open it on Acrobat to add more fields for it, additional demographic data, maybe some extrinsic factor data, but again, a useful supportive tool for teams as they are working towards ensuring that we are engaging in equitable pre-referral practices for multilingual learners. And that is linked hand in hand to what we know to be important in progress monitoring. Number one, data. No decisions can be made without appropriate data, and our data should be based on intentional teaching that is culturally and linguistically responsive, and the instruction is relevant to the students. And also, although here it calls out 4 to 6 week trials, we by no means want to say that this is how long an intervention should be trialed for, and that's it. It's more of a ballpark figure as to what you would consider. But also, I want to highlight the fact that those 4 to 6 week trials, what do they look like? Is it only one Wednesday? Is it 6 weeks, but we only got to do the intervention 3 days? So again, being cognizant of that information, and that again could be documented in that previous appendix that I shared with you. And then analyzing that intervention, is it truly appropriate? We had said that the student needed intervention in reading comprehension, but now we're seeing that it's not necessarily related to comprehension. Yes, comprehension is impacted, but it's more linked to decoding. So perhaps scaling back and analyzing whether the intervention is appropriate. And then again, making those adjustments to interventions and or refer for further assessment, or reconvene that multidisciplinary team and share the information that is being gathered as we engage in the decision-making process. And it can be tricky, which is why we truly appreciate Appendix 3.5, the decision-making process. Now, flowcharts were not my friends in middle school. Now, as an adult, I can truly appreciate this one. So this decision-making process allows teams to engage in these conversations and make appropriate determinations as we are looking at that pre-referral process that is equitable for students who are multi-language learners. Now, before I hand it over to Lupita, I want to call your attention to this note-taking guide. And this note-taking guide, when you click on the link, it should prompt you to make a copy so that you can have it live in your Google Drive folder for perpetuity. And it has a couple of questions there that are helpful for us here as participants, but more so for you to take back to your sites and engage in these discussions. So as I pop open the resource, you'll see that the questions that are here on the slide are also included within the note-taking guide with follow-up bullets to support the process. So the chat question that I want you to entertain answering while I pop open the guide is, which of these tools do you find most useful for the level of work you are currently engaged in? So go ahead and complete that poll. While I pop open the document, you'll see that it prompted me to create a copy. The same questions that were on the slide are here: pre-referral tools, resources. What is your documented pre-referral process? And some follow-up questions. What are your current pre-referral practices? Because there may be a disconnect. What's documented versus what truly takes place. Are the progress monitoring methods and tools appropriate for English learners? And do they contain a language bias that may be affecting the data? So you'll see that all of these resources are linked here as well. So whether you utilize the slide deck or this note-taking guide, know that those resources are available for you there. And really, please take your time in completing that poll. And I know I'm seeing some of you say that you wish you could select all of them. I felt the same way. I felt the same way when I started learning about these resources. So absolutely great tools to support your discussion for equitable pre-referral processes for English learners. So to put it all into a flow, Lupita is going to take us on this tail end of our journey together so that you can see how else these resources might be supportive to your craft. And based on our poll, English learner initial referral and decision-making process flowchart is really the one that won out. Hooray for that resource. And guess what? Lupita is going to take you on this journey with a companion resource that is going to help you navigate that pre-referral flowchart. Lupita?
Thank you, Vanessa, and thank you everybody for your thoughtful questions and insights being dropped in the chat. So much of the work that we do and how we continuously improve is but through your interaction and through your engagement through these types of professional development, because we want to be responsive to your needs. We know that it can be a bit overwhelming when you are approaching an area that perhaps you don't feel you have sufficient expertise on. I absolutely can speak for that. And going back to Vanessa's comment about how our team is very intentionally designed and created so that we can do the heavy lifting together, that team lift that Vanessa often refers to. And so we invite you to consider that approach and find somebody that can fill your blind spots so that we together can create systems and processes to improve outcomes for all of our learners, particularly in this case, regarding this topic, are English learners who continue to struggle academically. So it's good to know that many of you, if you had to choose, you didn't want to choose, but if you had to choose, you felt that the pre-referral flow chart, I think it's figure 3.5, was one that it's going to be your first, you're going to reach for that one first. So we want to be able to offer you what we think is a little bit more accessible, learner-friendly resource that really is designed from that pre-referral flow chart, which is this particular infographic that was created by our lead consultant, Dr. Deborah Montoya. So I'm going to walk you through the infographic in just a sec, but I want us to focus on these 4 components on the slide because we're going to walk you through and make connections with the resources that Vanessa just shared with you. In other words, the design of this pre-referral flow chart is to be able to facilitate a conversation, taking into consideration these very critical elements when we're thinking about a referral for pre-referral activities for English learners. And how might you use the tools that Vanessa walked you through addressing each one of these components? So I'm going to walk you through the flow chart. We're going to revisit, and I'll be able to point out where those figures that Vanessa walked you through live in respect to the flow chart. So again, as administrators, as leaders in the field, your responsibility, one of your responsibilities out of many, is to be able to build capacity with your staff, right? For the purpose of what? Improving outcomes for all of our kiddos. So this flow chart is going to be able to be utilized as a tool to bring people together, to build knowledge gaps, to identify perhaps some gaps in practice, and therefore ultimately refining a more effective process to meet the very unique needs of English learners as we are considering a potential referral for assessment. So I'm going to ask Vanessa to open up the infographic, and I believe it's already dropped in the chat. Thank you so much for your help. So if you can pop that open for us, Vanessa, I really appreciate it. So I want to be able just to give you kind of a walkthrough of how it's designed. And what you'll notice right off the top is the 4 components on the previous slide are basically steps in the process, and they are sequenced in such a way where the way that I see it, it's kind of like sifters, right? So you kind of put your sifter in the water, and then what stays in the surface is what you're looking at, right? And then once you pull out the pieces that you need, and then you're thinking, well, what's next? Then you do the second sift, find more information or gather more data, 3rd sift and 4th sift. So I want you to think about it through that analogy, if it works for you. So the first sift, if you will, is taking that deep dive into the CUME file. What is there? What's current? What is missing? And so the considerations here are, what are some pre-existing factors that may have an impact on the student's progress? What are some, perhaps their physical or health conditions? Perhaps the student is in need of a more current vision or hearing screening, because we're seeing these concerns and then being able to understand and follow directions. So that first sift is what exists, what is in there, and that information we're going to find in the CUME file. Whether or not interventions have been in place, whether or not the student has already been assessed, right? We don't want to do that again. So once we determine what is in there, we're going to be able to, at first glance, and then using that first figure 3.3, to be able to collect and organize that information to determine whether or not we need to continue with the second sift. If this information is sufficient enough to determine that we probably need to spend a little bit more time on some more intensive interventions or some more appropriate supports, or maybe, we need to take a closer look at English language development instruction because we don't see any evidence of that happening consistently, then we want to pause. We want to pause and implement those types of supports and instruction before we move directly into referring for an assessment. The next step, step 2, thank you, Vanessa, are personal and cultural factors that we want to take into consideration. Now, these factors we may find in the CUME file or we may not. So perhaps there are some current life events that have an impact. Perhaps this is a newcomer family. I often refer to a newcomer student as a newcomer family. And so the family is new to the community, new to the country. Perhaps that, they're not familiar with the resources that are afforded to them outside of the community. And so once we do that second sift, if you will, and connect with the families and find out what's going on, what do they need, then the support that we provide is directing the family to different services within and outside of the school, rather than identifying the student as, okay, we're going to refer you to special education assessment because you're struggling. When we know and understand that some of these factors, mobility, trauma, and the family absolutely will have an impact on students' learning and progress. Step 3 on the infographic is very important. I would argue that it's the most important factor when we are considering an English learner who is struggling, and we're at the point where we're thinking, yeah, let's assess. If we know that comprehensive ELD, both designated and integrated, is subpar, that staff, teachers are not as familiar with the ELD standards and perhaps have not had training on the 2012 ELD standards, are not familiar with how to incorporate linguistic supports, are not familiar with the language proficiency level and what kids are able to do respective to each of the proficiency level. If those pieces are not in place, and we're using tools to gather that information, such as Appendix 3.3, Appendix 4.6, a classroom observation checklist, Appendix 4.4, English learner teacher questionnaire. If we gather that information and the determination is that English language instruction via comprehensive ELD is subpar, we need to pause, right? This is not the time to refer for special education, because this is part of the reason why we believe that there is an over-identification, as we saw on that first slide, of English learners into special education. We know that the common denominator of those 3 categories, those top 3 categories, that common denominator is language. And if this step, this third sift, indicates that English language instruction is subpar as a result of lack of training, lack of knowledge, lack of support, lack of knowledge of the ELD standards, then we absolutely need to pause and provide the support where the support is needed. Make sure that our teachers are trained, that they have the support and the resources that they need, that we are incorporating, including our special education teachers in our ELD standards training, that we are inviting our general education teachers to collaborate and work with our special education teachers so that we can build some common knowledge and understanding. Because after all, comprehensive ELD is tier 1 core instruction for all English learners, including our English learners with an IEP. So it merits that we spend the time and the resources, right? When we're thinking about prioritizing, it merits that we spend the time and the resources in providing support and training so that our students, our English learners, and our English learners with disabilities have strong, effective, comprehensive ELD throughout the instructional day across grades. So again, this is absolutely, and maybe I'm a little biased, but this is absolutely, I would say, my first stop. When we're sitting at the table and talking about an English learner who is struggling, that would be my first question as the English learner lens at the table. What does comprehensive ELD look like? Who is providing comprehensive ELD? How consistent is it? How familiar is the teacher with the ELD standards? And what can I do, right, to be able to support that? So again, very critical question, very important sift in making sure that we are providing what the supports that the students need, as well as the staff, right? Because we all know that we all want to do the very best, but if I'm not equipped, if I have that blind spot, I need to lean on Vanessa, and Vanessa and I can work together to be able to provide the appropriate supports. And the fourth component are learning environments. And this is where we take into consideration kind of the big picture. How well are our teaching and learning environments culturally and linguistically supportive? When the child is coming into the classroom, does the student feel supported, valued, safe? Are the appropriate supports implemented, the linguistic supports through integrated ELD? Are teachers given enough training and support to be able to implement tier 1, 2, and 3 instruction when necessary? So again, this infographic is designed to give you a roadmap, if you will, and discussion points with your multidisciplinary team, where you can gather information using those data gathering tools, tongue twisted myself right there, that Vanessa walked you through, and begin to paint a comprehensive picture of what the student is able to do, what types of supports he or she may need, and where are we in terms of this pre-referral process, so that we're constantly gathering current information and providing the necessary supports as we continue to keep this child in the loop and stay focused on making sure that the student is progressing. There's some reminders at the bottom of this infographic, but Vanessa, I'm going to ask you to go back to the slide deck and take us to the slide where these reminders can be found, because we want to just highlight, right, these two very critical pieces that we kind of want to hang on to as we are having the discussion about pre-referral activities and how well they're going, and the supports that follow. So first and foremost, folks, comprehensive ELD. It's important to know, understand, and share this information that comprehensive ELD, meaning both designated and integrated ELD, is tier 1 core instruction. It is not an intervention. It is not an intervention for English learners. Might you need to provide additional support in ELD for some English learners? Yes, absolutely. However, first best instruction, tier 1 instruction, includes comprehensive ELD for all of your English learners, which includes your English learners with a disability. The second, please note, of our infographic is this one on the assessment component. So I'm going to read it because it really is that important. The normal process of English language development, as well as manifestations of dialect and social linguistic variance, shall not be diagnosed as a disabling condition. Being an English learner is not a qualifying category for special education assessment. Therefore, we need to take into consideration what the student needs through the lens of the student acquiring English language. And that's why comprehensive ELD is so important, right? Without that type of support and service, comprehensive ELD, we absolutely will see children struggling, not progressing as quickly, as adequately as we want them to, as they are able to, given that they have these types of supports. So again, we want to call out these two notes in the flow chart in this infographic, because we want to take that into consideration all throughout the 4 SIFs. So I'm going to pause for a minute and just give you some think time. And I want you to just, based on the pre-referral flow chart and how we are inviting you to utilize it, just give us your thoughts about who or how might you use or share this resource. Just some think time to kind of process the information. What do you like about it? How might you begin to use it immediately? Just give you a few seconds to process that. And I see some questions in the chat. Do teachers know about BICS and CALPS? That's a really good question. And this is why it's important to take stock of what type of professional development has been offered. Has it been focused on the ELD standards and language acquisition best practices? There's another question. Are there districts already providing comprehensive ELD that are successful in decreasing referrals? I'm sure there are. However, I can tell you that based on our experience, this topic of comprehensive ELD, we get a lot of the questions that we're seeing in the chat of wondering, where is this happening effectively? So again, going back to professional development and support, in order for us to be able to support staff, dare I say, hold them accountable for implementing comprehensive ELD, we must first make sure that we are providing them with the appropriate training and supports and resources so that they are equipped to implement comprehensive ELD effectively for all of your students. So I see some notes about using the checklist, gather data, include your EL lens, your TOSA, your coach. So I see a few reflective questions. I'm going to ask Vanessa to move on to the next slide because these are excellent questions. And I want to bring us back to the note-taking guide. I want you to take note of what's on this slide. So the live links on the left side of the slide will take you directly to the resources that we've shared with you up to this point. But Vanessa, if you open the note-taking guide and take us to the second page. The second page of the note-taking guide, again, has these live links to all of the resources we've shared with you today. And as administrators and leaders, we wanted to be able to give you a resource that you can have in one place and be able to share with staffs, again, for the purpose of building capacity, with the goal in mind of really refining and reflecting on your current pre-referral practices so that you're able to, together as a team, identify where are some gaps in practice, gaps in knowledge, and start jotting down which of these resources might we begin to implement, which ones are we going to prioritize, what activities as a result of us, understanding that we need to bump up comprehensive ELD, what activities do we need to start initiating. Again, the note-taking guide is a simple tool that has all of the resources we've shared with you up to this point for you as administrators to be able to, perhaps on your own, start jotting down some notes, designing a staff development plan, or maybe creating a group, a team that's coming together, a task force, if you will, to be able to take a closer look at your pre-referral processes for your English learners and refine your current practices. So we hope that it becomes a useful tool to you after this training to be able to jot down some actionable next steps. And again, you can add to it, restructure it because you're able to make a copy, again, bringing you back to the resources that we've shared with you up to this point. Vanessa, next slide, please. If you take us back to the slide deck. So I'm being mindful of the time. We're still good in time. We have a couple of other things that I wanted to share with you. So at the beginning of the slide deck, one of the questions posed our role in making sure that our pre-referral process is not impacting over or under identification of English learners into special education. So a critical element of that is understanding language difference versus disability. So I want you to drop in the chat very quickly, what does this practice look like at your site? How does your multidisciplinary team review and discuss the comparisons between language difference versus disability? What does that look like? Does that topic come up? How is it addressed? How is it discussed as it pertains to the referral process for this kiddo? Next slide, please. We have a resource that we want to share with you. Please know that everything in our slide deck, all the resources that we've shared with you today can be accessed directly through the slide deck. We didn't create an additional Padlet or something of that sort. We wanted you to be able to take the slide deck and the accompanying recording, which will be shared out probably shortly after this presentation, so that you have the resources in one place. So in this case, on this slide, if you click onto the actual document, the actual image, it will take you to a copy of the actual resource as it is designed in the practitioner's guide. However, where I really want you to spend some time on today is our activity that we designed based on figure 3.3. And so Vanessa's popping it open. So this particular activity is the way that we designed it is to help folks become familiar with some possible behaviors or manifestations of what could be a language difference, a behavior of a language difference or a disability. So we created it so that it's in a virtual format, but you can very easily just create it as a jigsaw. So Vanessa, let's spend some time on the first slide, the direction slide. So you can see here, it's very simple directions that you can modify, again, for the purpose of building capacity on language difference versus disability. Figure 3.3 is not an exhaustive list, but it's a way to, again, establish some common understanding and possibly even bring this very critical element into the discussion when we are thinking about referring an English learner. So now we can go to slide 2, which is one of the tables. There are 9 tables in figure 3.3, each one of them focusing on a specific area, academic area, behavior area. We're going to spend just a few seconds on the first table, oral comprehension listening. Each of the tables is organized exactly the same way, where you have some learning behaviors manifested, some examples of what that might look like. The second column are indicators of a language difference due to language acquisition. And the third column is indicator of a possible learning disability. So as we together read across the very first row, if the learning behavior for this topic, oral comprehension listening, if the student does not respond to verbal directions, and then the next one says student lacks understanding of vocabulary in English, but demonstrates understanding in L1, then that would be an indication of a possible second language acquisition behavior. Very typical, right? The next column, however, will indicate that the student is consistently demonstrating confusion when given verbal directions in both languages, language 1 and language 2. In this case, let's just say it's Spanish and English. This may be due to a processing deficit or low cognition. So each of the table is designed this way. There's a topic, there's some learning behaviors that may be commonly manifested, and when it potentially could be a language acquisition concern or an indication of a possible learning disability concern. So again, not an exhaustive list. It's a resource that we've repackaged based on figure 3.3 to build capacity, common understanding, common language, so that we can have a more focused and robust discussion on whether or not what the student is manifesting in his or her learning or lack of progress is a result of typical language acquisition or an indication of a possible learning disability. So it's good to go, folks. Let's move on to the next slide, Vanessa. Thank you. So another resource, an additional resource that we want to share with you is our student scenario for this particular chapter. So we affectionately call this lovely little girl Crucita. She plays a really important role in our work in that this particular student scenario, we see several iterations of it throughout the practitioner's guide. So this particular student scenario, if you notice at the bottom of the slide, encompasses these 6 elements, right? And if we walk through each of the elements, the role of the school environment, English language development, differences between language acquisition and disability, a CUME file review, identifying extrinsic factors, and the English learner intervention summary. So this student scenario is broken up into these 6 areas. I am certain that at this point in our presentation, these 6 areas are familiar to you, given that we've provided you some resources via the figures that Vanessa walked you through, as well as the infographic that I shared with you, where we are identifying where those figures can live to help shape or refine your current pre-referral practices, as well as the language difference versus disability figure 3.3 figure, as well as the accompanying activity that we created to help establish some common understanding on this very important topic. So all of the pieces we've walked you through up to this point today can be captured in the student scenario, in that the student scenario is an exemplar. It is an exemplar where all of these areas are taken into consideration in the most effective and comprehensive way. So it is designed to be able to give the practitioner, the leader like yourselves, kind of an example of what the pre-referral process, taking into consideration all of these areas, could look like. A best practice, if you will. Who are the key players? What are some of the key elements? that we ought to consider when we are taking into consideration the possibility of referring a student for special education assessment, and if it warrants it. So thanks, Vanessa. So when you pop open the student scenario, you'll see that we've recreated it similar to the language difference versus disability, except for this is not a slide deck. This is actually the document itself. And we, with the little box for instructions, should you want to jigsaw it. And so each one of the areas, if you keep scrolling down, you'll notice here the first area is the role of environment, and it will give you an exemplar of what the environment looks like for Cruz, where she is receiving comprehensive ELD, that she has provided ample opportunities to engage and use the English language in authentic ways, that appropriate supports and interventions are being implemented, that cultural and linguistic supports are being included in her teaching and learning. In the second area, English language development, the teacher is taking into consideration her LPAC score and also the different domains within the LPAC score. So not just her overall score, but other English language development information, such as her listening, speaking, reading, and writing abilities based on the LPAC. The third area in this exemplar speaks to language difference versus disability. So the behaviors that in this case Cruz is manifesting are leaning more towards a possible disability. And so as you read through this area, you're going to see some examples of what that might look like. The fourth component is a CUME file review. And we know that that is step one in finding information, what is current, what might not be current, therefore we may need additional information. In this case, for Cruz, it's identified that she has not been assessed, and because she's a second grader, we don't have current CASP data for her, so it's critical that we are gathering classroom data as we are building her profile to determine whether or not assessment is warranted. The fifth area is identifying extrinsic factors, those factors that may exist that will impact learning, her attendance, whether or not, there are health issues existing or maybe non-existing that we're not aware of, reaching out to family and finding out what types of supports that she may be receiving at home. Given that in this case, her parents are non-English speaking parents, however, they are both fluent in Spanish. So do the extrinsic factors impact her learning? And in the case of Cruz, you'll find that they do not. And the final area, which is the English Learner Intervention Summary, what types of supports and interventions have been implemented? In the case for Cruz, she is receiving comprehensive ELD and is receiving additional supports via tiers 2 and 3 instruction. And data is being gathered to show her progress or where she continues to have areas of need. So again, we recreated this student scenario that can be found in the practitioner's guide in such a way that you're able to utilize it, in this case, as a jigsaw activity, and begin to have conversations about, if this is the exemplar, when we kind of filter through what may be happening or not happening at our current site, where are the areas of need? Where might I need to, as an administrator, provide more support? Where might I need to be able to shift some resources to make sure that, teachers and students are getting the resources that they need, again, ultimately, so that our students are going to benefit from all of this. So there's a question here that I want you to consider as we're kind of rounding out the corner. We do want to give you some time for Q&A, and if time permits, walk you through our website where we have additional resources on this topic and other topics related to dually identified students. So the question here a couple of questions. So how well are these areas considered prior to referral for special education eligibility? And again, these are reflective questions. So if it's something that you kind of want to mull over and think about for yourself, or if you want to pose a statement or a response in the chat, please feel free to do so, because this, again, it's a reflective process. And the second question, what might be some actionable next steps for each element in this particular scenario? So these are questions for now. These are also questions for you to ask when and if you should engage in a jigsaw type activity when taking a look at this exemplar student scenario, as we are considering this pre-referral process and activities. Again, for the sole purpose of ensuring that these assessments are warranted and necessary. And if they're not, that we are also providing the student with the appropriate supports that they may need or their families may need, because that's also a very important part of the multidisciplinary team, is to provide the supports that the student needs, not a how-to special education services. So I think we have one more slide that I want to share with you. Full circle here, folks. We're coming back to the guiding questions that Vanessa introduced at the beginning of our presentation. So we hope that we very intentionally planned this training to be able to address these questions. So we hope that you are leaving today with some tools, some resources, some ideas, some activities that you can take back to your site, to your staffs, that address or begin to address and reshape or refine, reflect on your current practices, so that we are ensuring that we are providing appropriate supports and not referring unwarranted referrals for our English learners, and as well as providing appropriate supports for our dually identified learners, but that's a different training. So I want to be able to pause here with about 5 minutes prior to closing and ask our team, our facilitators, if there are any questions that you may have or any questions of our participants. And we'll pause for a minute or so for that. And then if time allows, we will walk you through our website. So we can go to the next slide, ma'am. I'm just doing a Zoom pause for questions before we pop open our website.
So we did have a comment, but it's more of a request, and we love getting tarea, getting homework, and that's perhaps looking at that flow chart in a one-pager format. And definitely we love hearing suggestions and requests from out in the field, because it gives us something else to mull over. So thank you. Thank you for that suggestion.
So Van, I think we do have sufficient time, given that there aren't any questions rolling in, to just walk folks through our website and have them become familiar of what's in there and how to find resources.
All right, so I see that Kian dropped in the chat our web address, and feel free to click on it so that you can follow along, and let's do that. So I'm going to stop my share and reshare. Let's see if that works now. I couldn't get out of here.
And then they want a printer-friendly infographic, so maybe share with them the different ways that they can download the infographic.
Yes, so this is our landing page for our website. And you'll see that we have this purple bar up here, and we're looking at this section, Improving Outcomes for English Learners with Disabilities. And these are the resources that we have available. So you'll see that we have our statewide impact section, which has a map of the different places where we've been. But where I really want to make sure that I hit on are the resources related to our work. So training modules are available here, variety of training modules for you to access. We have pre-recorded resources pre-recorded videos and corresponding resources from our virtual admin series to more topic-specific videos. Know that all of these videos are present on YouTube. You may access, play, replay, share out. Resources as well. You'll find a link to all of the corresponding resources there as well. So many videos with a variety of topics for you to take a look at. And then on top of that, we also have future training opportunities, but also resources related to the California Practitioner's Guide. So as I mentioned, the document itself, it's a PDF document for 100+ pages, can be rather cumbersome. So what we've done is we've taken it apart into its already existing sections, but made it available in a one-click format where you're not having to go through the actual document to find all of that information, but you can just click on section by section or chapter by chapter to get to the topics that you need. All of the appendices that we shared with you today, as well as other appendices that are located throughout the practitioner's guide, are available here as standalone documents. So again, if you get to the appendices via the practitioner's guide, you'll have them all lumped together. Here, they've been torn apart, separated, so that you can have only one at a time, and that way you can save locally into your device. We've also included the figures, and we've organized them by chapter. So that way, if you're looking to find a resource that's linked to a particular chapter, you can do that just by clicking and finding what you need. We also have the FAQs, which are broken down by chapter. So you have a question regarding the IEP, specifically linguistically appropriate goals and objectives. Well, here it is. Must an ELD goal be included in the IEP? No. Not an ELD goal, but rather a linguistically appropriate goal and objective. So again, all of those resources here at your fingertips, information related to the EL roadmap, the ELD standards, the LPAC, Alt-LPAC, CASP, accessibility resources, and all of our infographics. So the infographics that we shared with you today and then some are available here on our website. Know that these are available to you as a PDF download or as a PNG download as well. You can print, share out, and just have it be a useful tool in your practice to depersonalize some tough conversations, just like the resources that we shared today as you're engaging in conversations where you're trying to discern whether it might be a language difference or a disability. You'll find a lot of information here related to Tier 1 core instruction, Tier 2 interventions, the alternate LPAC task types, and a variety of chapter by chapter resources that take you visually through the content in each chapter and are linked back to the actual document itself. So know that all of that information is there, as well as Padlets and additional infographics, some of the podcasts, and some of the podcasts that we've done, some of the website navigation and resources that we've provided, as well as a link to our newsletters and how to subscribe to them. So again, that available for you all in one stop. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. I know we're right at 1:30, and I want to make sure that we honor your time and let you know that we truly and deeply appreciate every single one of you. And thank you for your time and your attention today. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa and Lupita. Really appreciate your time and expertise today. And there were so many resources that were provided. And I know we had lots of great comments in chat, people that were wanting more. So I do hope that people will go to the website. And also, as has been said, we will share the recording and you'll have access to these resources. Again, there's a quick poll. We're hoping you take a few moments. I know it's already over time. So again, it's up just on your screen. Should just take you a minute to let us know your thoughts. We always take those into consideration as we consider next webinars and what else we're going to provide for you. And again, can very clearly see that this was an area that people have a great interest in. So your feedback will be very helpful for us in future. And again, Vanessa and Lupita, thank you. Wonderful information and great that you're here to support the field in the way that you do. And we hope everyone enjoys the rest of your day. And, again, feel free to leave right after you've done the survey. Okay. Thank you, everybody.